All right, so what's going on? Welcome back to the channel. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about ND filters, specifically ND filters for your DJI AVATA. Now in my hand, I have the standard pack, the CPL and UV filter. Now, Freewell sent these out to me to test out and also to show you guys the advantage of having, ND filters on your DJI AVATA. If you're, trying to get cinematic footage, it just makes your footage look a lot smoother than what actually comes out of the camera. So today we're going to talk about the advantages, and also I'm going to show you the settings that I actually use to get my cinematic footage. Now with the DJI AVATA with the FPV, I'm new to FPV. I've only been flying for about 3 weeks, and setting up the camera is just slightly different, not too much different, but just slightly. There's like one setting that I definitely don't do when I'm using my camera drones. Like I said, I've only been flying for a little bit in manual mode, but I do feel confident now that I can actually do a cinematic sequence without it looking, too crazy. So before we get started, we're going to take a look at a cinematic sequence that I did flying in manual mode, and there's going to be footage with and without filters. Now I would tag some of the clips here and there to let you know if it has a filter or not, but majority of them I'm not going to have tags, and I want you guys to see if you notice any difference in the footage, if there's any, and also let me know in the comments too if you did notice anything. It's a lot of nets out here. I'm in the middle of the field here. So sit back, relax, enjoy this part, and we're going to come right back and talk a little bit more about these. All right, so here we go. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please do me a favor and hit that like button. Also, if you like drone reviews, tips, tricks, tutorials, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell so you don't miss any of my content. Now, what we're going to do is talk about the Freewell ND filters. We're going to talk about the standard 4-pack first. That's what I use for the cinematic footage. And the 4-pack comes with a ND8, an ND16, an ND32, and an ND64. Now, if you're not familiar with ND filters, basically all they do is reduce the amount of light that enters through the lens and onto your sensor, so you can reduce your shutter speed to get smooth cinematic footage. Now, based on your shutter speed, this definitely helps. Now, without an ND filter, it's hard to get what they call the 180-degree shutter rule, which is you have to set your shutter speed double or 1/double your frame rate. Now, if you try to do that without an ND filter, everything will be all blown out and you won't get a pretty picture. Now, the whole objective is to get motion blur, which our eyes are more accustomed to. And with the GPS camera drones, we're normally flying, say, 200, 300 feet in the air, and motion blur is not that important. You really don't notice it. However, with the AVATA and the FPV drones, specifically, you will notice it because you are flying closer to objects. You're flying through gaps, you're flying closer to the ground, and you'll notice the motion blur or the lack of motion blur if you're not using ND filters. I'm not going to go too deep into the 180-degree shutter rule. However, your shutter speed should be double of what your frame rate is, or 1/double what your frame rate is. So if you are filming in, say, 60 frames per second, your shutter speed should be double that, so it should be 1/120. Now, in this last, the footage that you just saw, I filmed that in 50 frames per second and exported it in 25 frames per second. Now, that's something new for me. I normally like to film in 24 frames per second. However, the AVATA does not have 24 frames per, that frame rate. And if I film in 60 frames per second and try to export it to a 24 frame per second timeline, you're going to get, jittery, or it's going to be very jittery. And even with the ND filters, it was a little bit jittery. So like this example here, you see that this is a 60 frame per second clip, and I tried to export it on 24 frames per second timeline, and you can see the jitters in it, and it's not that smooth. But with 50 frames per second, I was able to, smooth it out with 25 frames per second a little bit. And also the ND filters helped because it's basically double the frames per second. So it's like once you get into the odd number of frames, it kind of makes everything, out of whack. So that's what I did for this clip, and I'll continue to film my cinematic footage in 50 frames per second until, DJI hopefully gives us 24 frames per second, or 25 frames per second, or something like that. So now it comes in a nice package, magnetic plastic case, just like Freewell. Typical Freewell, they always put it, package their stuff nicely, and this stuff is not that expensive. I will leave links in the description below so you can go ahead and check them out. I don't even think they're that expensive, but this is very nice. Now, they also provided me with a UV filter. Now, the UV filter basically is supposed to protect your lens or your camera from the UV rays. I use it for an added layer of protection for the camera, just in case if I'm not using an ND filter, I just slap that on and just go ahead and fly. Just in case I crash into something, it is an extra layer of protection. Now, like I said, just mentioned, they do package very well. This comes in a nice plastic case, has an extra slot here for another ND filter. If you have another filter that your favorite filter that you carry, and you don't want to carry all these, you can just slap this in here, and that's that. Also, they provided me with a CPL filter, just a straight CPL filter. So what this does is reduces the glare off of shiny surfaces, and such as like glass, water. So this is not an ND filter. This is just a straight CPL filter. I don't know if they ever come out with a CPL or ND CPL filter for this, but this is very useful if you're flying around water. Even off the leaves, if there's like reflections from the sun off the leaves, this does actually help. And it also brings out the saturation because of, it's reducing the glare off the surfaces. It actually enhances the saturation in colors. Now back to the ND filters. The way I choose my ND filter is slightly different from when I use the camera drones. Now I just place, depending on the time of the day, I usually know what kind of filter that I need. So what I do is place it on the camera, and these are simple to place on. All you do is just snap it in. You will get your fingerprints on it, so make sure you carry around your cloth, your cleaning cloth, to wipe it off when you install it, because I don't see any way to avoid putting your fingers on there. And all you do is just snap it in place, and it does stay very secure. I've had plenty of crashes, mini crashes with the ND filter on, and it just remained in place. Now removing it, all you need to do is just take it off, but it is a little bit difficult taking it off. So make sure you secure your camera, and when you take off your ND filter, or actually when you place it on and take it off, make sure you secure it so you won't rip off the dampeners here on the camera. So how I choose my ND filter is not too difficult. What I do during the day, if it's like late morning or late in the afternoon, I usually use an ND16. It all depends on the lighting situation. And midday, I usually use a say ND32, maybe an ND64 if it's really bright. But with this camera, I don't see myself using more than an ND32. But specifically with an FPV drone, you're filming in and out of places, in and out of shadows. You're constantly filming, and you're going through dark areas. So you want your camera to adjust accordingly, the lighting adjust accordingly. And so what I do is slap on a filter, and I set my ISO to auto. I set everything else to manual. So if I'm filming in 50 frames per second, I'm setting my shutter speed to 1/100. And I'm pointing the camera in all different directions and watching my ISO to see if it's adjusting and see how high it's adjusting. Now I try to stay within a limit of 400 or maybe 800, and depending on the day or the lighting, and that's how I choose it. And I'll set it to a max of maybe 800 or to 1600 ISO, so it doesn't go over 1600, for example, when I'm going through a dark area. I do that because I don't want the lighting to shift drastically when I'm going through a dark area. I try to keep it where it's not that noticeable. But that's how I choose my ND filter for the AVATA. Now, you may do it differently. Some people I see just locking in their ISO at 100, but for my case, my preference is, setting it to auto and capping it or maxing it out at maybe 800 or 1600 ISO. All right, so like I said earlier, these ND filters do make a difference, and they do help smooth out your footage, especially your FPV footage. I hope DJI does send out an update that gives us 24, 25, 30 frames per second. That will help smooth out the footage even more because you're filming in the native frame rate. And if you are interested in picking these up, I will leave a link in the description below. And also, if you are interested in learning a little bit more about ND filters and how they work, check out this video right here. And I'll see you on the next one. Peace.